All right, welcome, John Darcy. How are you?
Good, thank you, Andrew.
Okay, this is episode 3 of The Plough, where we talk about the farming and food industry. And I've brought John along today because I don't think there's someone who has greater expertise in farm safety than John. John, welcome aboard and tell us about your new venture.
So I'm looking to set up an entity similar to an organisation that exists in Western Australia, where they have Safe Farms West Australia. I'm looking to set up something called Safe Farms Victoria as a not-for-profit body that will support Victorian farmers with health and safety.
Yeah.
And I'm looking to kick this off around July this year.
And you've also got your own JD consulting business, which is back live in a week or two's time.
Yes, and I'll run the two parallel, but with the determination to get the farming entity up and running. But I will be able to support business across other industry sectors as well.
Yeah. Now, your history in farming is quite deep, isn't it, John? You've done a lot of time with the Victorian Farmers Federation.
Well, 3.5 years through the project called Making Our Farm Safer with the state government funded project. And through that project, the entirety of the contribution of that was 39 monthly newsletters, 360 farm visits, 140 odd speaking engagements across Victoria.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very intensive engagement with the industry, and it had a profound effect on the industry.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? Yeah. We saw a significant reduction in injuries and deaths during that period of time, and a lot of it has to be attributed to you providing people with those really simple tools about how to make a farm safe.
And I've definitely grown a passion for it. My history with OHS is 35 years across multiple industry sectors. But when I went into the VFF, I put my hand up for that role deliberately because I could see it was the industry with the greatest need.
Yeah.
And probably the industry where I could probably have the biggest impact.
Yeah. Yeah. We just might head off to the next slide, which is the history of farming safety. Now, we as a law firm do a lot. I mean, we have industry groups, which is the Food and Farm Group, which deals with food processors and farmers, and we're probably handling at the moment 5 to 6 serious injury or fatalities in farming every year. But farming is an industry that really struggles with the stats, doesn't it? I mean, it has terrible, terrible injury and death rates.
It has been at the top of the tree perennially for decades, every year, year on year. And it may not necessarily stack up in terms of overall numbers, and people do just see the count of accidents versus construction or road transport manufacturing. But the way that the governments and our state and territory regulators measure it is by per 100,000 workers.
Yeah.
And when you take that approach, the ag sector remains at the top of the tree every single year.
And it's not just a little gap, like it's a big gap between the number two, isn't it?
Very, very significant. And we're talking about 2% of the Australian workforce, yet about 14.5% of fatalities every year.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And so grossly misrepresented, or sorry, overrepresented in terms of overall fatality statistics.
So, Sophie, if we can just move to the next slide, I guess that we need to spend a little bit of time saying, look, what is the causation? Why is there more in farming than anywhere else? And what do you think, John? What are the drivers for you?
Well, one of the things I had to overcome in terms of breaking down cultural barriers when I went into the Making Our Farm Safer role was actually farmers' attitudes and beliefs. And shortly after I started there was an annual report produced by a South Australian-based body called AgriFutures, who produced a report on annual statistics. And following that, a senior industry representative came out and said, it's an inherently dangerous industry.
Yep.
And that's actually part of the market problem, that there was an acceptance that because we had high numbers year on year, it was just part of working in that industry.
Yeah.
And I had to explain and jump in to say, no, it is not an inherently dangerous industry. The risks were manageable risks, and that farmers could do proactive things. And this goes to what I knew coming into the role, that what needed was actually thorough and extensive engagement with farmers to talk to them to that detail.
It's interesting, isn't it, John? Because in the last two prosecutions or pre-prosecutions that I've dealt with, the farmers almost describe their farm as their backyard. So as they open their door, like I do when I go to my house, I've got a bit of concrete and a bit of grass, but I don't feel it's inherently dangerous when I walk out there. But they walk out the back door and they see, 1,000-pound beasts wandering around. They think they're okay. They're driving plant and equipment which is inherently dangerous on rough soils. They're doing a whole lot of things, but as they describe it to me, they go, well, look, it was just a stupid thing to do. Or that's sort of the risk you've got to take. Sometimes things don't work out. And I look at them and go, but you're a workplace.
Well, this is you've encapsulated half of the issue, and in that it is their home, and they don't differentiate it as being a workplace, and also loss of sight that they are employers if they do employ anybody. But tragically, nearly half of the workplace accidents and fatalities actually involve the farmer themselves or immediate members of their family,
Yeah.
and also their children.
Yes.
And so that disconnect between the workplace and the crossing that boundary when it comes to home, and then it's the workplace.
Yes.
They don't grasp that.
No, they don't. And if you had your child next to you on a road and there was a car coming down and the child went to step out, you'd stop it. But in a farm, they don't see the risk. They're blind to it.
They are, and this also lends into the attitudes and misconceptions and beliefs, and the effort we put into trying to change that thinking.
Yeah.
And to engage with farmers to explain to them. A lot of it was about using words like you, your, and engaging with them directly to say, well, yes, you have to think about the safety of your employees, but also think about your own safety.
Yeah.
And you should recognise the hazards and risks. But farms are not necessarily different to other businesses, automotive or construction or manufacturing type environments, where particularly with small business, they become accustomed to their workplace. They become accustomed to hazards and risks. They become oblivious to them. And again, the engagement, the need to get into their minds and hearts.
Yeah, well,
so
look,
you need to look.
I think so. So, Sophie, let's just go to our next slide, if you would, thanks. I guess the major issue for me here is desensitisation. That we've run litigation around the management of cattle going into small enclosures. We've seen a really odd practice of actually not understanding what a farm is as well. So there is a tension here, by the way. There is what you do on a farm and how you manage risk, and there is taking a sort of manufacturing mindset by WorkSafe and trying to apply a document-rich process to a farm which can't work. But what really struck me about that as I took witness statements is everyone I spoke to said, "Oh yeah, look, you've got to watch out for animals, and yeah, they can weigh up to 1,000 kilograms." And I said, "But if they step sideways and you're next to them, you don't weigh 1,000 kilograms, and they'll hurt you." And they go, "Yeah, you can be hurt. You've got to be careful." And yet they wander along next to them when there's snakes and all sorts of things around which cause that 1,000-kilogram beast to jump sideways, and they don't think for a second, I think I should be a bit more careful.
With cattle in particular, WorkSafe in the last 12 months or so have run a cattle campaign, and they engaged with a range of industry stakeholders and did it very, very well. And it was challenging from the mindset of were cattle and sheep inherent risks, using that terminology that farmers would resign themselves to. Again, animal safety is an imaginable risk.
Yeah.
Now, with that, it was around good yards, good fences, good crushers, good infrastructure to manage the animals, but then also training workers and farmers too to ensure that they are competent, skilled, know their animals. But also, it also went into protection of other people. And that included vets, people, the livestock transport drivers, the people selling the animals and coming and evaluating them. And so that opened the door then to responsibilities of farmers under the Act, their duty to other people.
Yep.
And to make sure that they did provide supervision, that they were looking after the safety and welfare of their people, to make sure that they were present.
Yeah.
I dealt with an incident not long ago where on a sheep property where someone was very, very badly injured. And I could see the risk straight away for the farmer when WorkSafe started looking at these matters, and the farm wasn't there at the scene at the time.
Yeah.
And thankfully, there was a livestock agent on hand with the livestock transport driver who was crushed by the vehicle. He was able to render assistance. But clear as day, and with WorkSafe, with their guides they put out for their cattle safety campaign, part of that is clearly emphasising the farmer must be present.
Yep.
But that's not been the case in the past, and that is a challenge for farmers. But that is part of their duty. That is part of their responsibilities.
I know, and one of these difficulties, I guess, is farmers will say to me, and they regularly do, "Look, that's just impractical. I can't be everywhere at once." But the short answer is, if I'm going to be moving beasts of any sort, and I'm going to be moving them into an enclosed space, there is going to be unpredictable reactions, and if someone's in that enclosed space, they're at risk. So it's like I plan my day. You know, my diary maps out meetings that I've got, it maps out this, but it also maps out areas where I have to do specific work myself. Although farming is an irregular practice, you have to have deliberate practices around safety.
You do, and it's not acceptable to just resign yourself and say, I've got too much on my plate or I've got other things to do. It's not just about the fact that you know your animals or that you know your workplace and your crush. It's making sure that those things are right and serviceable and suitable for the other people to come and use, but also being there to render assistance in an emergency situation, provide the first aid,
That's right.
to contact the emergency services. And that was part of the pitfalls of this particular incident I referred to, just the panic and the rush when something went wrong.
And look, if we look at what is reasonably practical, identification of hazard, determination of risk. Well, animals moving into enclosed space is definitely a hazard.
Yes.
The animals themselves are a hazard. It's a high risk, and therefore, if you say, well, look, I just can't be everywhere, I can't control it, well, you've already breached your primary duty. But it gets a bit worse, doesn't it? Because you get to reckless endangerment where you say, well, is the risk of an animal hurting someone a risk of serious injury? And the answer is yes. Then am I indifferent to it? Do I not do something? Well, that's sort of go to jail. That's reckless endangerment. So I don't think people, as they're doing this analysis and keep saying it's not practical, well, the full court has said it is practical. WorkSafe don't live on a farm. They live by a set of rules and risk strategies, and they say, no, if you're present, it may have happened, but you wouldn't have been liable, but you can be present.
Part of the success of engaging with farmers and talking to them, and a lot of it has been telling farmers things they don't know, but taking our knowledge around the law and how it's applied to explain to them that when things go wrong, it all becomes very, very black and white, and WorkSafe will lead evidence to the effect of what the law says and what the Act provides for and reasonably practicable, but then explaining that in a simple, practical way to farmers as to what that means in the context of what they're doing.
The judge doesn't care. Can I just say, when the judge is sitting there, they're not a farmer. They're not interested in how you run your business. They're interested in identifying what the hazard is, determining its level of risk, and what was the control that was in place to provide a safe place of work. And if you can't do that, you're guilty.
Well, they measured, of course, on the test of reasonably practical as an objective person.
Yeah.
And what they would say a reasonable person should do in the circumstances.
Yeah.
And having regard for things that the regulator puts out and state of knowledge. But this again fits in this issue around farmers resigning themselves to it's just inherently dangerous industry. Well, no, there's expectations around these things that you will manage those risks.
Yeah, and look, food processing. Now, there's an inherently dangerous industry where you've got knives and large machines that are crushing and tearing at things. There's two other issues I want to address on this before we talk about, well, what does the systems analysis look like? I guess one is plant and equipment, particularly quad bikes, which I think for you and I are
Passion.
Just an absolute passion, because if you look at the fatalities, so many of them are on quad bikes, aren't they?
The big three in agriculture are tractors, number one, quad bikes, number two, and side-by-side vehicles, number three. And I spent a lot of time trying to change the mindset and culture around quad bike safety in the 3 years I had. It's an issue that I actually had a extensive involvement going back 17 years earlier when I was at the Automotive Association, advocating against the fitting of the bars on the bikes. But that issue evolved full circle to the point where the key words again, reasonably practicable. It is definitely reasonably practicable for farmers to fit those bars to the bikes.
Yeah.
Driving through regional Victoria and driving past lots of farms, it worries me deeply. And I'll be very deeply concerned, not just from the point of view of reckless endangerment, but industrial manslaughter.
Yeah.
For any farmer that's not fitting.
Can I just say, John, I was only driving down the country the other day, and in the paddock next to me, which had rocks and bumps and was not an area which had gone through a lot of pasture improvement. So you could actually see the bumps that were there, and there was this young guy riding a fair amount of speed, so not that much slower than my car driving down a highway, no bars. And my heart just sank, and I thought, do you not understand? You only have to hit the rock once the wrong way and you're over, and you've got half a ton of machinery falling on top of you. Your chances of survival are nil.
Well, this is a lot of farmers who are pushing against the fitting of the bars on the bikes, the operated protective devices they're referred to. We're arguing that you should make sure that no one under 16 rides them. Yet, unfortunately, 40% of farming families in a survey confirmed that they allow children as young as 13 to ride the bikes. But they also argued that you should be able to depend upon training and also wearing of helmets. And when we talk about OHS and reasonably practicable, regard need to be shown for the hierarchy control.
Well, that's right, isn't there? Administrative controls, and at a
PPE.
high risk, we've got to go for mechanical intrusion or complete prevention.
Now, to the people who've manufactured those bars, and this was a pushback from the major manufacturers at the time, that they would make the bikes unstable or affect the structural integrity of the bikes. Well, they haven't.
No.
They've stood the test of time. They've been engineered and tested by the companies who manufacture them, and they've been proven to save lives. You can't, the helmets and the training won't stop the weight of the bike landing on the person, but a bar will.
Can I just say the other part about this is, John, farms have just become a target of regulator involvement. The regulator, as you said, for a number of years has felt that farms are inherently dangerous too. They've sort of kept away from it. It's a place that's not been their focus, but that's changing, isn't it, across Australia?
I'm not critical of the regulators in this sense, in that they cover all industries and health and safety across the broad spectrum, and also by virtue of geography and how many farms out there. And this is the beauty of what we were able to do in the time, and what I hope to be able to do in future, is to help in that regard to pretty much do a lot of things that I know the regulator can't do.
Yeah.
And that's where it is needing to engage with farmers on their terms, with the compassion and empathy, and help them.
Yeah.
And that's I knew that walking into the project. I can see that's still a need today.
Yeah. Look, I hope as that happens, to be candid, I hope we never have another incident, but we will within the next 7 days, because that's how often they happen in farms. But what I would hope is the designer obligations under safety legislation are enlivened by the regulator, and they actually go after the producers of the quad bikes for not mandatorily fitting it. Does that make sense? Because I just don't understand how you can build a dangerous vehicle.
Well, it's not so much the new bikes, and the major manufacturers of the bikes all left the Australian market, and there's only a handful left who still sell new bikes in the country. And with new bikes now, through the Australian consumer laws, they actually are required to mandatorily fit the bars. But the problem is that those standards don't apply to the older bikes that the farmers already own.
Yeah.
And that's a huge worry, because, again, from a reasonably practicable risk liability point of view and safety point of view, it's getting to the farmers about their existing bikes.
And that's why it should be a recall. I mean, that's what I'm saying. In respect of that, there will be a liability. And at some stage, the regulator's going to say, well, someone built this dangerous machine. They're now aware it's dangerous, and yet there's been no attempt to actually recall the machines and fit them so they're safe.
Well, there's that, and this is not just an Australia-wide problem. This is actually across Europe and across the EU, across New Zealand as well. The same challenges exist.
Yeah.
But given the experience here in Australia, we are saying they are reasonably practical, they have worked. It's getting that message out elsewhere as well.
So tractors and side-by-sides?
Tractors, number one, the reason why people dying on tractors, falling off them, falling under them, getting off them while they're moving, not having interlocks in the seats to make sure they're switched off or can't move when people remove their bottoms from the seat, and generally unsafe practices. Putting a tractor in crawl mode is the old expression, particularly with older makes and models. You could still leave them in first gear and get off and attend to the attachments on the back. And a number of people run over by their own machines under the wheels or under the attachments. And so the need to engage with farmers about those unsafe practices. On side-by-side vehicles, or the other alternative to quad bikes, they are definitely inherently safer. Wider wheelbases, roll cages. The biggest issue with side-by-side vehicles is seatbelts, and people not clipping in the seatbelts and then getting catapulted into the windscreen or catapulted out through the vehicle. And that's akin to education around road safety.
Yep.
And trying to get through to farmers. Now, farmers might say, do you really expect us to get it on and off the vehicle 50 times and unclip the seatbelt because we're attending to the sheep or the cattle? Well, maybe not when you're moving at 2 or 3K around the animals, but when you're driving that 5K, 10K back to the farmhouse down the potholed roads, yes, absolutely, you need to be wearing the seatbelts, because you're travelling and it's 30, 40k an hour with nothing between the windscreen and or that catapult position, but the seatbelt.
And we'll talk more about, well, how do you create a system like that in a little bit of time? But the last thing I wanted to talk about, desensitisation, I guess, is around children on farms.
So 14% of farming fatalities nationally were children under the age of 15, and that was highlighted through a coronial recommendation from here in Victoria a few years ago, on the back of dealing with a number of child-related farm fatalities. And farming is different to other industry sectors. You don't see your mechanic or your builder take their child to work, but it is their home, it is their workplace, and children grow up on the farm and learn to become their future farmers and want to emulate dad.
Yeah.
And learn to drive tractors and side-by-sides.
Well, I was just thinking, when I was at school in Ballarat, a number of my mates were farmers, and when I went to go and get my licence, they'd been driving from the age of 8 or 9 in utes and things like that, and they laughed at the fact that I had to be taught to drive. But a couple of those aren't alive today. So this idea that children, when they walk out the door of my house, it's relatively safe. I've got a pool and there's a fence that prevents them from getting into the pool. But in a farm, the moment you walk out the door, the risks are all alive, right down to the fauna that exists of snakes and things like that. The risk is alive. So, and it's very hard to educate an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old on risk. In fact, it's almost impossible to get them to be responsible for themselves. So how you actually create barriers around that risk is a really important thing.
It was an incredibly important project we did on the back of that coronial recommendation. And when it was actually aimed at WorkSafe, TAC, Agriculture Victoria, but when the coroner made those recommendations, they came to us and said, can you do it, VFF, because we know that you'll be able to engage with farmers and do it more effectively. And that led to the formation of the guidance on child safety on farms.
Yes.
But that actually spoke to farmers in their terms. One of the issues with children and farmers themselves being injured or killed, or family members, and actually does a disservice in a sense to getting the hearts and minds and influencing farmers, is farmers are underrepresented on prosecutions.
Yes.
For that very reason. To their credit, regulators don't go after the family when they're already hurt, and there's no value in that. It's not in the public interest. It doesn't fit under the thinking around the enforcement guidelines. But that lends itself sadly to downplaying the seriousness of safety in the industry.
Yeah.
Because you don't hear about those prosecutions, you don't hear about those incidents, and thankfully not. We don't want to.
Yeah.
But it really emphasises the importance that you talk to the farmers about their own safety and that of their families and their children.
I think that takes us probably, Sophie, to our next slide, which is, well, what does farm safety systems look like? I guess the thing that bothered me in around about the last 10 matters we've dealt with in farms, people have reached out regionally to OH&S people who picked up a forklift full of documentation which is completely generic, land on the farm and said, okay, that'll protect you. None of which is actually reasonably practical to do, but is immediate evidence of reasonable practicability for the purpose of the regulator. So if you don't do what's in this highly bureaucratic piece of work, then you will be liable. And I guess for you and I, we've been fighting pretty hard to say to farmers, look at high water risks first.
Yes.
And then have a method of teaching and being satisfied that people are competent on the 3 or 4 key things they must do. And do document that, and do document the training, and do have a risk process which is clear and available, but don't get caught down the paperwork pathway, which you'll never do.
So we're not taking down the path of risk assessments and complex OHS systems, and it is a huge worry for farmers and businesses who have consultants who sell them things that they don't need or are never going to use. But still tying it to the legislation and key requirements around consultation, involving employees in the process of identifying and controlling risks, and giving an easy pathway to do that. So I talked to them about the fact they do need to consult with and engage with their employees around tractor safety.
Yeah.
That they do need to engage their employees around the safe use of the quad bikes and the side-by-side vehicles. They do need to engage around safe animal handling, and even keeping basic diary notes or records around those conversations they have.
And it's a regular conversation, isn't it, John?
Yes.
Because desensitisation on a farm happens very quickly, because remember, very hard to get rid of your unconscious bias. If you've grown up on a farm, you're used to going out and helping dad or mum do something. you'll forget the safety part of it straight away. So when you're talking about tractors, you got to get there and go, now look, here are the safety features of this tractor. Do you understand them? Okay, now when we use it, these are the 3 rules we never breach. We never get off that tractor while the engine's going. We set those rules and say, you do it, and if you're an employee, you're out of the business. Golden rule. But you make sure that each Monday when people come on and go, okay, Fred, this time your turn to take us through tractor safety. John, your turn to take us through animal safety. So that those 3 or 4 directives become second nature. And as you say, John, it's recorded, it's in the diary that it's happened, and there's a worksheet that says very clearly what's being trained on, and you can show competence.
Having some competency checklists just to use as tools or resources, and the value of having these things readily available and made and created and designed by industry for industry that make it easier for farmers to use.
Yeah.
And a lot of those resources are available through the VFF, through the Making Our Farm Safer website, and stuff that I hope to create in the future. With farm workers, we also have challenges around fatigue, harvest, long working hours, and to workers not doing the right thing. The challenges around how many workers we have, seasonal workers, shortages of labour.
And it's also language often being, yes, English being a second language,
particularly in the horde sector as well, with the overseas seasonal workers for that sector too. And unfortunately, again, the law doesn't differentiate between farms and other workplaces. It applies across the board, and the expectations around employers expected to manage those risks. But again, not acceptable to we have challenges, for example, with seasonal workers from Europe and coming in to help with the grain farmers do their harvests, and a lot of them want to make a lot of money, come to Australia for a short time, and are happy to work 14, 15, 16 hours in a day. Not one day, but 6, 7 days in a row sometimes, because it's about making quick cash and then hit the combi van and travel around Australia once they've done.
Yep.
But to say to a farmer, no, that's not acceptable if you allow that to happen. But who's telling them? And again, this is the importance of having someone who's engaging with farmers, by farmers, to talk to them and educate them and talk to them about the risks.
Yeah. So when we look at what a system is, a system means that you've got a safety plan. You've got to have a look at that first.
Yes.
You've then got the processes that deliver that safety plan, which are sometimes short policies and procedures or short work statements. So it's very important in farms that you focus on high order risk first. Okay, they're the big things that you're aiming for. Then you've got the training, consultation part and competence part. But then you hit the big thing, supervision. Supervisor must know what the safety plan is, know what the process is, be satisfied a person's competent and supervise it. You then look at checking to test that it's actually working.
Yes.
And finally, even on farms, you need to have a sort of monthly go back and write and say, so look, this is what we've done, and just have a short report. Because remember, if we protect the officers, which are the owners, the farm will be safe. So if those owners do that process, you can bet your life that the people beneath are going to be able to understand and do what they need to do.
Well, you summed up beautifully the philosophy that I take in terms of my history with the legislation and dealing with the employers in a broad sense. If I can help the employers to make their workplaces safe and to understand the law, that ensures that the employees are safe.
It does, doesn't it? But we've got to say this, don't we, John? Not bundles of paperwork, okay? It's got to be, these are the high order risks based on the nature of the farm. These are the 4 or 5 things you must know and do.
Yeah.
Supervision and execution around that to make sure it's right. Documenting that you've done it, and then, as I said, testing it, checking it's being done, and eventually once a month going back and say, I've done 3 checks, I've done this, tick. Officers are safe, employees are safe. But if you start to take, in larger farms, it's slightly different, where it's a more corporatized farm, you can improve that process. But for the mum and dad farms, or for the farms with 6 or 7 workers, the most important thing is they know what the risks are and they know what to do.
Take them through, as an example, around the particular time of year when you're looking at harvest and machinery, and talk to them about plant safety. But also, in fact, don't forget to talk about the same risks that we talk about in other industry sectors as well, the emerging risks like psychosocial health.
Yep.
Farm businesses are no different. They will have bullying. They will have sexual harassment. Throw in your bullying policy in a particular month when you talk about plant and safety. When you're talking around getting ready for harvest and you're doing the seeding and you've got the spray chemicals, talk about chemical safety, throw out the personal protective equipment policy.
Yeah.
And the value of a plan and doing things bit by bit, month by month by month,
And so,
and then do it again.
yeah. And look, I'd say to the farmers that I act for, look, I know you don't like this idea, but pretend your family's a board. So have one Sunday a month where you sit down and you actually go through what you're doing as a business. And the first item you have on, look, what have we done around safety? And mum or the boy, write it down that you've done it in the diary. It only has to be in the diary, but that you've done it and what's been said. And when the regulator comes knocking, you're able to demonstrate exactly what you've done and they'll leave you alone.
We touched on something that's really important there, and this goes to small business generally with the multitudes that I've been with over the last couple of decades. Often the brains trust of the business is the good lady wife or the mum.
Yeah.
And two sets of ears are better than one in terms of all the OHS knowledge and information you need to take in. But then mum can often help. They can assist. They're good probably more with the paperwork and having the conversations, documenting, recording things. As with often with trade businesses and farmers too, they say their skills are their sets of hands. They want to get out and get dirty and do the work, and they do hard physical work. But it doesn't escape the fact that they have to still manage safety.
Yep.
But keep it simple. Give them the practical tools and resources, and give them a simple action plan, and guide them through the journey.
All right, look, we're going to go to our next slide, which is talking about what happens in the future, succession and life after farming. John, our business deals with farmer succession issues, and I want to sum up what I say, and you'll be much better at it than I will. But when we're presented with farmers, we commonly get a 70-year-old mum and dad come to us, which is far too late, and say, look, I'm handing over to the son. I've got two daughters, another son who's not on the farm. I've got this land, which I believe we sort of hold in trust for the family going forward. And as we speak, I realise they've got relatively low returns on the property. There's not been a great deal of innovation that's happened, and there's no idea of what mum and dad are going to do. And they often move to a lesser house that's on the farm, and the boy comes into the major house with the kids. The boy's 50 years old at this stage, or 45, has often not been paid properly for 20 years. And there is this enormous tension as we start to unpack what does the future going to look like and what does it look like, brothers and sisters. It should have been thought of when dad and mum were 35 to start what that plan looks like. But what we end up with is if we're not successful very quickly, we end up what are called testament as family maintenance actions by other members claiming an interest in the land. And what was once a loving family falls apart in litigation. So, two things I want to say before I throw to you, because you have a much more intimate knowledge. One, it's not something you hold in trust, it's an asset, and that's how your children will see it going forward. So it's not something that you can promise generations ahead. Secondly, like with any asset, when you die, everyone wants a piece of the pie. And just the fact that someone's farming on it doesn't mean they get it all, or they don't have to pay for that asset, because that's what the law understands. So over to you, John.
Well, it's a beautiful segue. The issue is not just the asset and the value of the property and what's left to the children. It's the fact that farmers are working in their 70s and 80s and heavily overrepresented. 40% of farming fatalities are people over the age of 60 in Australia. And the average age of a farmer in Australia and Victoria is 72. And with that, we do have people, you don't see or hear about people on construction sites or in manufacturing environments being injured or killed in their 70s and 80s. But farmers are different. It's their property, it's their home, it's what they become accustomed to every single day. And farmers are very reluctant to give up. They want to keep on working for as long as possible. And many of them are very fit and will. But then, of course, with age comes risk, the perception falls apart, physical dexterity, mobility, jumping on a quad bike, but not being able to use dynamic riding skills, climbing up and down farm machinery, the risks of falls from heights, the animals not being able to move out of the way quickly enough and putting themselves in danger. Now, unfortunately, though, they haven't made conscious decisions around delegating work. They haven't factored in getting their kids and family to do the work. And by the time it gets to the scenarios you've described, often the relationships have been totally destroyed.
They have.
And their children have left the farm. They're not getting paid, as you said, enough. they decide to go and do their own thing, or they leave the industry entirely, and families break down. This is a core focus with the guidance that was created on older farmer safety in a handbook that was created for the VFF. Again, with the mindset of see a need, fill a need, we could see it clearly an area that needed to be spoken to, and where farmers needed to be seek some guidance to help them come to informed decisions. But succession planning was a huge focus on that. With farmers not tackling these conversations, and you said probably 30 in their 30s or 40s, that's probably very sound guidance. But at least if they're 50 years old and not starting these things, well, it's too late if they've got to 60 or 70.
Yeah.
And if they're not tackling these challenges and they've got the family with them, it can lend to bullying type behaviour, breakdown in relationships that can flow onto other employees. They're not concentrating on their work, distractions, just a whole host of safety implications that come with this, on top of then the financial and family considerations and breakdown in relationships.
I think that that's just the thing that struck me. I sat in the room with a family. They were between 50 to about 35. The children, the mum and the dad. Mum and dad were good people, but implicitly there'd been promises made which were never spoken to, which the eldest son, who was farming, said halfway through. He said, "But Dad, here I am. Yes, you paid for the kids' school fees. You've paid, not me. I've barely been able to scratch a living. And you promised me a farm, and I'm sitting around and Andrew's saying, well, this is an asset. You haven't treated it like a business. In a business, farms have a return on capital. People get paid wages. If you don't treat it like an asset, you're left in a position where who has the entitlement now in respect of this asset? And we're trying to reach agreement across a family now who actually don't like or trust each other." And they all nodded. And I thought, when I first did my estate planning, I went around the house and actually marked on the back of paintings and things whose they would be, because they loved them, so there wouldn't be a fight over stuff like that. And I had a clear formula that everyone could follow, and people knew if I gave something in my life to them, that came out of the bounty of the estate, because everyone got equal. But I did that because I've been managing farming estates since back in Scottsdale in Tasmania when I started being a lawyer, and seeing families shattered by no one talking and telling the truth about what was going to happen when they died.
I approached this purely from the safety mindset around the risk to the farmers and trying to keep them on the planet longer.
Yeah.
And to point them towards the risks they expose themselves to by staying on the farm longer, and the physical risks, and then also the psychological risks with this issue of succession planning. But part of that was clearly to stress the need to point them towards getting the right advice and guidance, and to talk to people like yourselves and the right financial advisors or legal representatives who can help them to work through these issues.
And the difficulty for me is, we have in our farm practice, in the litigation side or the destructive part of the practice, our Sydney business deals specifically with farming and food. That's its core business. But over 80% of the work is litigious. And it's litigious about family breakdown. It's not around debt management and all the things that we do really well and have skills in. And it's certainly not around developing estate planning, which is what it should be doing. So I wouldn't mind if our litigation dropped down to 30% and succession grew to 70%, because I'd know we'd have happy, good people and proper plans in place. But actually being on the back end of a fight, we know as we take that file on, it's incendiary. We know that whatever damage has been done, it's going to get done worse. But for the people who are affected, you can understand why they're doing it.
I attended a bonfire event at Racknaville about 18 months ago. It was evening, and it's getting a bit cold, but they had the fire going. And we were talking around full range of safety issues and about older farmer safety. And one of the older farmers, 82-year-old, came in and asked the question, what do I do if I've got my children now taking legal action to take claim of the farm? And I had to say to him, mate, if you've not addressed these things, you've left it clearly way too late.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to see the relationship's probably deteriorated and broken away well before then, but then it's getting into families tearing themselves apart through the courts, and that's not a good thing.
Well, look, let's wrap it up a little bit here, because I guess the things that John and I particularly wanted to talk about today were these. One, don't get scared by safety. safety is manageable on farms, it's not an inherently dangerous place. It is a group of manageable risks. Secondly, don't go and buy or build elaborate systems that nobody will comply with. Identify the high order risks, build very clear through consultation, clarity with each person who works there, what are the actions they should take, and document that in its simple form and nominate a person who does that and build a monthly report that you can go to. I don't care if it's in a diary. I don't care what it is as long as it's real. And finally, stop treating your land like it's something in trust that will go to another generation, because the generation of children coming through don't see it that way. They don't have the same love of farming that you probably do, and they see it as a business. So start treating it like a business, paying people correctly, and managing what it looks like going forward in a way which gives clarity to your children, because it doesn't matter about an asset. It doesn't matter about anything else in the world. In your last few days of life, the only thing you think about are children and your family.
Yes.
Why tear that up? Why destroy your own legacy by not wanting to have what is really quite a simple conversation?
And focus on the safety of your employees, because that is what the law provides for. We talk OHS in our space, but also focus on your safety.
That's right.
And the importance to protect you and keep you on the planet longer. But in that context as well, to the issue we talked about with succession planning, also your family, and providing for them as well, recognizing the risks as well, that if you don't manage these things properly, it can destroy your family and your relationships.
Now, as a last thing, if you want help with safety and you don't know John's details, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to pass on John. He is the person I use on farms exclusively and has the best knowledge of it, and will help you build an understandable and reliable way of managing risk in a language and voice that you understand. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time, and lovely to meet you again, John. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.